Fantastic. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Martin County Library System Virtual Tech Talk Intro to Podcasting. I'll be your host, Manuel Payano, and joining me as a co-host, you already heard from her, is Stephanie Piccino.
Hello.
Now, let's go ahead and go through. Oh, yeah, thank you. Let's go ahead and get started. Before we get started, your microphones will be muted upon arrival. Please type any questions into the chat. We'll pause throughout the session and address those questions. The recording of the presentation will be emailed to all registrants next week. Our objectives today are to define what is a podcast and where they can be found. We will detail whether starting a podcast is right for you. We will list the basic equipment needed to create your first podcast. We will explain the difference between podcast hosting and podcast distributing. And we will also compare some of the podcast hosting sites and directories. And first is, what is a podcast? Well, the word podcast is derived from iPad as an Apple's iPad and broadcast, meaning to transmit for general or public use. Podcasting was first developed in 2004 by Adam Curry, which was a former MTV video jockey and a software developer called Dave Wiener. Coded as a program known as, they both coded a program known as iPodder, and they used the program to download radio broadcasts and store them in their iPods. Well, that took off real quickly. And let's see. Oh, also, a fun fact is that Adam Curry was one of the first people to go ahead and start recording a podcast as a podcast form. He went ahead and started the Daily Source Code podcast, and I ran from 2004 to 2013. By 2005, a lot of big companies recognized that opportunity. And Apple was one of the companies that led the way, capitalizing that the format was already using their own product, the iPod. They started by immediately adding the format to iTunes 4.9, and it was the first update with native support for podcast. It had it already listed as a podcast. Then in 2006, Steve Jobs recorded a podcast using GarageBand 3, and GarageBand 3 came with a podcasting studio feature. So what is a podcast? Once again, it's kind of like a talk radio show that is available online for you to listen at your own leisure. It is a series of spoken words, audio episodes, all concentrating on a particular topic or theme, like cycling or just startups or cooking. You can, you can subscribe to the show using an app, or you can also listen to the show through a website. They can be with or without a video component and can be found in several directories, such as Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, or Spotify. And most of those directories can come in an app form that you can access through your mobile device. Now, what are some of the most popular podcasts? Well, we have over here a list of some of the most popular podcasts and their different formats or topics. We have Pod Save America about American politics, Stuff You Should Know, which is a trivia and educational podcast that started in 2008. This American Life, which first started in 1995 as a weekly public radio show about short stories and essays. We also have Serial, which is a nonfiction serialized audio narrative and can be even cataloged as true crime, just like Crime Junkie. And we have the news podcast, The Daily. Then, should you start your own podcast? There are several reasons why a person can or should start their own podcast. One of those is if you have a group of audience that you would like to connect to. One of the pros of starting your own podcast is that your listeners, your audience can tune to your content anytime and anywhere. It is inexpensive to get started. It can be lucrative once you like monetize it or you are able to get a sponsorship. It helps you grow skills in public speaking. And of course, if you have a business, you can maximize your audience interaction to your business or your group. One of the cons is that, well, of course, it can be time consuming. And also, the market is very saturated with a great amount of podcasts at the moment. And that makes that depending on your topic, your competition will have a way higher production value. And if you don't have an audience to begin with, it can take it some time for you to build one. Now, do we have any questions in the chat?
No, we're good.
Fantastic. Then let's go ahead and continue. Then let's go ahead and talk about the stages of creating a podcast. Well, we have separated the stages of creating a podcast into three. We have the planning process that on that one, you will concentrate on finding your goal, a topic, and the format that you will have your podcast on. Then, of course, the production stage where you will set up, find whatever you need, and then you will start recording and edit the audio or the video or both. And then we have the publishing stage where you will find a hosting site and then you will list it in one of the podcast directories or several of them. Now, let's go ahead and see the way that you will get started. The best way to go ahead and get started is defining what your goal is. Once you have your goal, then you can go ahead and start working on choosing a name and a logo, which especially choosing a name, it can help with, if you're trying to get, well, if you're trying for your audience to find it easily online. Then we have finding the proper equipment to start recording and editing your podcast. You can also then will start to find a place that will host your podcast and your audio files online. And the last step will be to add it to a podcast directory. Now, on the planning stage, you want to go ahead and decide what is your goal. Are you just trying to start a new hobby? Are you just doing it for fun and you're not expecting to create a big audience or monetize it? Or are you planning to monetize your podcast and build a career out of it? Or are you just wanting to use your podcast as a platform to communicate with a specific audience or with people that might be interested in your business? And then we get to the point where you want to try to figure out what format are you going to be using for the podcast. The format that you decide, it will depend on your goal. For example, if you're just doing it as a hobby, having a solo or monologue format will work best. But if you're trying to build a career, maybe an interview or non-fictional or fictional storytelling will be some of the ones that you want to get started with. Now, for the solo and monologue is usually used for people that have a specific kind of expertise that they want to share with others. Like there is not a lot of setup or things that you require to get started. You can simply just get a microphone, start recording. Many new podcasters start with this format because it's very simple and easy to get started. All you need is a microphone and editing software, and you're good to go. As opposed to the interview style, which features a host. If it's going to be you, then you have to find different guests to interview. Each one of the new guests will bring their unique expertise and experience. And after a brief guest introduction, you or the host will take over asking questions and guide them through the conversation. Since each guest is different, it's best to stick to a central, theme to keep the show like connected or cohesive. Another format will be the conversational one. And this is another very common format, which involves two people having a straightforward conversation who generally have like great chemistry together. Unlike the interview format, both of the people are considered a host. In many cases, each host will play a specific role in the conversation. One might report like the news, and the other one will provide commentary or even some comedy connecting them. Then, of course, we have the non-fictional storytelling. Uh, this this is basically a podcast that features several episodes about real life events. You might dive into a series of murders or chronicle an expedition to like basically Mount Everest or like an interesting adventure. You can also recreate historical events. You can tell one story per episode or span your story across like the entire series or an entire season. Or you could just simply report the news. That's another way that you can go ahead and use the non-fictional storytelling format. And following that format, we also have the fictional storytelling format, which is our composes fictional stories told across multiple episodes, or even a story one for each episode. It's similar to dramatic television or theater. Some are narrated by a single voice, while others use multiple voice actors, sound effects, or even different audio elements. And just like a TV show, the podcast uses tension, a climax, and cliffhangers to enhance the storytelling process. Now, this format is great for creative types who like to create characters with plots or even build fictional worlds. And if you want to keep things more dynamic, you can have a mix of some of these several formats that may like be interesting to you, especially if you just getting started and you're trying to find what works for you and your audience. Then we move to choosing a topic, another very important part of the planning process, and even the producing they're creating a podcast. The reason why it's very important is because you want to choose a topic that it will be interesting to your audience, but also interesting to you. And if you have a host or a producer, to your host and producer, because let's say after 500 episodes, you might be extremely tired of it. So finding a way to combine these two will help you like maintain a cohesive like series without breaking down. Now, our podcast topic defines the structure, defines the tone, and the flow of the show. There's no right way to choose what to talk about, but it's helpful to explore a few options before making your decision. How much do you care about the topic? If it's not something you can talk about for hours on end, go back and try to find something else. Can you, if your plan, your goal is to build a career as a podcaster, can you monetize it? Would you be able to find revenue avenues through it? For example, say that the reason you're starting a podcast is to promote a yoga studio chain. Are you passionate about a like meditation? Are you passionate about yoga and the benefits that you can get through it? And would you be able to show or explain that passion to your audience? Alrighty, now, do we have any questions?
No, we are still good. You're doing a great job.
Thank you, thank you. Then we're going to go ahead and move to the setup. What do you need to get started? Well, the three simpler things that you need to get started recording your very first podcast will be a room, a microphone, and a camera if you're planning to do a video podcast. And of course, an audio and video editing software, depending if you're doing audio and video or just audio by itself. The room. Now, it can be any size, but small is ideal to minimize echoes and random noises. Now, of course, the size is going to depend on your format because you don't want to be in a cramped, you don't want to be in like a cramped space with a co-host or a full panel of like 5 people in there. Of course, if you're going for the small one, an unused closet is a great way to go ahead and get started. We also have the studio at the Blake Library. That's where I'm currently recording this class from. And soundproofing, which the studio here at the Blake Library also provides, is not always required, but is very helpful, specifically in larger rooms. Then we move to the microphone. Now, microphones come in many price and sizes, many configurations, and they are all a choice that you will make upon your preference, how many people are you working with, and your price range. Now, the cheaper microphones can come from like 25 to $35, while the middle ground can like head to 40 to 65, and higher end will go 70 and above. Now, what kind of microphone is for you? As we already mentioned, it depends how many people you're going to be working with. What is your setup? Do you have multiple people speaking? Your budget, and what kind of audio like hookup you're going to be using. And let's talk about some of the audio hookups that you can find in different ranges of microphone. Now we have the USB type. We have one of those here at the Blake Library, the Yeti microphone. That's the picture that you see there. Now the USB one is a highly portable and easy to record anywhere. And it features the same capsules and condensers as the XLR, but it comes with the ability to plug directly into a USB port on the computer. This will save you the hassle of needing to buy additional audio equipment to record your podcast audio files. And then we, of course, have the XLR. Now, the XLR microphones are the audio industry standard. They are used by rock bands, radio stations, and podcasters around the world. They capture an analog signal using a three-prong connector. Most of pro audio recording gear is designed for XLR microphones. Now, the problem with it is that it's not a very flexible connection to have. It requires a complex setup. Even though you can easily swipe microphone interfaces and cables with it, one of the biggest hurdles of the XLR microphone is that you can't use it on its own. You will need a mixer or a field recorder and an audio interface to capture your audio. The XLR setup is less convenient to travel with. And if you plan to be out and about, you probably won't be dragging a full backpack like filled with the XLR gear. And just on the side, there's also the lapel microphone that is useful for field work. But if you're just starting a podcast, you won't be working with those immediately. Then let's begin talking about the editing software. It will often be the software where the podcast is recorded. Most of them allow you to control over the sounds or what the audience is going to experience. They can be free, and you can also pay for them. Paid software often has more options and control over what you can see and do with the audio, while, of course, the free software will reduce your production cost. And we begin with the audio editing software. These over here are the most easily available audio editing software programs that you can find. We start with Audacity, which is free. We also have GarageBand, which is free on Apple devices. So if you have a PC, it's going to take you more, like it's going to be way harder for you to actually get started with GarageBand. So I would suggest starting with Audacity. But we also have the Adobe Audition, which is a paid service, and Ali2, which is designed specifically for podcasting and is done using like recording and done all the work through your browser. Now, when we talk about the free audio editing software, we have Audacity and GarageBand. Audacity, of course, and GarageBand, they're both free. Audacity is open source, which means that is developed by several several people. And if one goes ahead and gives up or decides to move on and start working on something else, there will always be someone working on it and coming up with new updates for it. Audacity is also cross-platform, meaning that whatever work you do on a PC computer, it can also be done in a Mac. So it's really good for if you are working as a team, because you're going to find people that don't necessarily all have Macs, or like you'll find people that will work on PCs. And if you're moving it from one platform to the other one, this is one of the editing softwares that you would like to use. Uh, the problem with Audacity is that it's not beginner friendly. The options can be overwhelming if you're not a professional. GarageBand, of course, we already said that is free on Apple devices. It's owned and developed by Apple. It is one of the most beginner-friendly audio editing softwares out there, and it supports MIDI recording. So MIDI it stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface, and it's a standard protocol for interconnecting computers with musical instruments, even stage lighting and other type of oriented media. And we move to the paid audio editing software. We start with Ali2, which is designed for podcast editing, and it comes at a price of about $32 a month. And it does most of the audio editing, like it's automatic. All you have to do is upload your file and it will do most of the editing by itself. And it's easy to publish to a hosting site, and it has even connections to it. Another thing about this service is that they offer podcasting classes with the service, so you pay for more than just the software. And we also have Adobe Audition, which is part of the Adobe Creative Cloud Suite. Now, just the Audition, it comes at $20.99 a month, and it offers one of the most comprehensive amount of options for audio editing and mixing. But just as Audacity is not very beginner friendly. Now, for Audacity, GarageBand, and Adobe Audition, you can find classes through the Martin County Library system by using your Martin County Library card to access LinkedIn Learning. Now, do we have any questions?
Yes, Manny, we actually do. Earlier when you were talking about like setting up for a room for podcasting, you were showing some tiles. Can you explain what those tiles were?
Alrighty, let me go back real quick. Are we talking about? Hold on, almost there. Are we talking
This
about
one,
these tiles?
yes, we're talking about those. Yes.
All right, so those tiles are usually the soundproofing that you will use, or most people use, in studios and recording rooms. And they just, it's not really required, but it really helps with echoes and minimize the random noises that you will get from the outside. And if you have any more questions about those, of course, you can come to the Blake Library and you can go ahead and explore and see how it works for you at the studio that we have in here. Here we go. Now let's go ahead and move forward. Do we have any other questions?
That's the only one we have now.
Good to go. Then we move to the publishing stage. Now, there is a big difference between podcast hosting and podcast distributing. The podcast hosting is basically you're going to grab your audio files and you're going to upload them to the cloud to a podcast hosting site. This is done by a host, and they will be storing your episodes online. It will be in the cloud, and most of them charge to keep your content online. Then from the cloud, you want to go ahead and connect your files to a podcast distributing site, which is done by a directory. And the directory is where listeners will go to access your show. And those are free to use. Now, podcast hosting sites. what is a podcast hosting site? It's the place that you're going to be storing your files at for easy access. Are they completely safe? It depends because the cheaper options might not be as safe as the most expensive ones. And if the company goes under or decides to stop that service, anything that you have uploaded to them will be lost if you are unable to get them on time. Now, the technology has simplified some of the technical aspects of podcasting today. Anyone can record a podcast and get it live online in a quickly way. You don't have to have much technical knowledge to go ahead and have it connected to a directory. Now, let's see. Uh, Over here, you'll find some of the most popular uh, hosting services. One of the reasons why you may want to use a hosting service instead of hosted yourself or connected yourself from your computer is that it will be easier to publish and you will get better analytics of who's listening to your podcast and from where. Like, are you having more like Mac users or like iPhone users than Android users? And and sometimes you're even able to get more information about the specific people that are listening to you. Now let's go ahead and talk about the services, the hosting services. We have Castos over there, which it, it provides the service for different audiences. The platform can host public podcasts that anyone can listen to, private or monetized, and they also provide one of the like highest price hosting services out there. The good thing is that uh, it can be customizable depending on your website if you are hosting it yourself, or if you're going to have your podcast on your own website, because it can easily integrate it into WordPress if that's what you're using for your own website. Then we have Buzzsprout, which makes podcasting simple. It does not limit what you can do creatively through it, and it's kind of the mid range of hosting services. One of the reasons why Buzzsprout is different from the rest is that it can be very beginner friendly, and they also offer classes and services on how to get you started. They also have the transcription services to be able to transcribe from just audio to basically subtitle version of your podcast. And then last, we have the one of the cheapest ones that is Podbean, which is a great. It has a great mobile app that you can just go ahead and if you record it on your phone, your podcast, you can just use their app to go ahead and start hosting it immediately, and it's basically the most budget-friendly option. And now we go to where do I post my podcast? Well, you're going to be posting it usually at or if you have a website there, but you will also going to be posting it in a podcast directory. Now, that's where people are going to go to find your different episodes, the different episodes of your podcast. And it's more like web pages for podcast. Some of the most popular ones, we have Apple Podcast, we got Spotify, Google Podcast, and Stitcher. Now, Apple Podcast, of course, since they've been the ones that have been in the business of as a podcast directory, is the biggest one out there. And do we have any questions about the producing stage?
Nope, no questions.
Fantastic. Well, that will conclude our class. If you are trying to find some tools to continue learning, we have a couple of books that you can get from our library, the Martin County Library System. One of the ones that I used to develop this class was the NPR's Podcast Startup Guide by Glenn Weldon. Also, you have the So You Want to Start a Podcast by Kristen Meinzer. You can access some of the LinkedIn learning classes that we offer. Some of those classes are To Podcast or Not to Podcast, GarageBand Podcasting, Producing Professional Audio and Video Podcast, Producing Podcast, and Speaking Confidently and Effectively. I want to thank you everybody for joining us in the class, and we'll go ahead and summarize what we have learned today. We learned that podcasting is like a radio show hosted on the internet. The word podcast comes from combining iPod and broadcasting. Recording a podcast requires a room, a microphone, and sound editing software. Your podcast needs a place for it to be hosted, either be on your own computer or on the cloud using a podcast hosting system or service. Podcast directories are where most people go to find podcasts. And it is good to try to have your podcast listed in as many directories as possible to maximize your audience. Now, thank you very much, everybody. You can also find some of our other Martin County Library System classes on our calendar. Remember that the recording will be emailed to you next week. And if you have any questions, you can always find us on our website or give us a call. Thank you for joining us, and we will